Joining us is Justin Jackson. Today we're going to demonstrate how to repot a bonsai, which is part of your ongoing maintenance. Before we do that, let's look at the materials we use for that.
Sure.
Starting with our containers. What makes a bonsai container?
Well, there's a lot of typical shapes that people have came to recognize over the years. With regard to Japanese pots, the rectangle pots are pretty common, and they're generally shallower and they have drainage holes in them. So you'd want to put some sort of mesh over them or something like that to keep your soil from falling out. And they go anywhere from really small to a lot larger than this. Then we've also got oval shaped. And there's also some of these really shallow trays that you can do different group plantings in and stuff like that.
Okay. I noticed these are ceramic, but then some of them are also plastic as well. So is there one thing better than the other?
Well, it depends on how much money you've got to spend. The ceramic is a little more expensive, especially when you get up into the really large pots. That gets very expensive for some of the large ceramic ones. So plastic works out really well. Some of this is really durable stuff.
And then of course when you bring them indoors, you want to make sure that you get a tray
definitely
to go with the pot. What about the potting media that we use?
Sure, and this is subject to a lot of different discussions, and people have their own recipes that they like to follow. I prefer these composted pine bark fines, and then I'll sift this and get it into a smaller size and just get the smaller size out of that. Then I like this decomposed granite or crushed granite, also works well. It's got a lot of sharp edges on it. It's not rounded river rock type stuff, so these sharp edges encourage the finer roots to hit it and split off and make more and more roots and get dense root growth out of it. And then I mix that together usually with a little bit of potting soil that I get at a local garden store that I found that I really like. That's how I generally create my bonsai soil mix.
Okay. Well, what do we need to do to get started on this group?
Sure. So the first thing we're going to have to do is get it out of this pot.
Okay. And this is a group planting, but all the roots are going to be interwoven, right?
Right. This is going to basically be like working on a single tree, really.
Okay. How do we need to loosen it, or how do we get it out of the pot?
Sure. So we can start out by going around the edge with the spatula end of a root rake and kind of freeing it from there. So a lot of times you don't even need to do this. It'll lift right out, but it doesn't hurt to break it away.
Okay. I think I got my side loose.
Now, if we're lucky, we can pull this up out of here as one square ball of roots.
And we're going to use this same pot for replanting, correct?
Sure, you can either step it up a size or you can keep the same size depending on what you want to do. If you're trying to encourage it to grow more, or if you want to maintain, you can use the same size pot and just reuse the pot.
Okay, but if you want it to grow bigger, give it a little bit larger container.
Pot.
Okay. Now, part of the repotting is actually root pruning, right?
Right. So the next step was going to be, we're going to lay this down and rake out some of these roots and then start trimming at them.
Okay.
So we need to root prune these trees about once every other year, depending on the species and how fast they're growing. And one of the ways we do that is to take out as much of the soil as we can and trim the roots back by about 1/3. And we can use a number of different tools for that. We can use root rakes or root hooks. It's often also desirable to use a garden hose on sort of the jet setting to blast a lot of the dirt out and make room without damaging a lot of the other roots that are still in there that we intend to keep.
And as you're removing this, I notice how very compact it is in there, and I'm amazed how much soil you pulled out.
Right.
Now with the hose, what is that achieving?
The hose is able to get in there and penetrate those fine spaces and knock the dirt, the old soil out of there to make room for the new soil without damaging the roots.
Well, now that you've cleaned these roots off, I have a couple questions on the surface. I know you used the hose to clear a lot of the soil away, but there's still all these interwoven roots. Is that okay to just leave those as they are? Sure,
we're going to leave those at this time. At this point, these are grown together so much it would be a challenge to separate them without killing any of the trees. And that makes a nice root on these, especially on these types of ficus trees. The root structure is really important on them, so it's nice to keep a lot of those big surface roots and let them just go crazy.
Okay. Now on the underside, what is our goal? What do we want this to look like?
We want to free up a lot of these fine feeder roots so that we can stretch them out and then trim them back by about 1/3.
And I didn't pick the best specimen for you to work with because this has been in a pot for probably about 5 years without being repotted. And we have a lot of these big roots in here. What do we want to do about that?
Right, on some of these big roots, you'll want to look at it to make sure if you cut this root, because it's desirable to have lots of small roots and not these great big ones. So you'll want to try to take them out if you can. But you have to be cognizant of the fact that if you cut this off, you're going to lose all this root development out here. And so you want to kind of look at it and gauge whether or not you think taking this out is still going to leave enough feeder roots back to allow the tree to survive.
Okay. Well, can you show us how to go about root pruning this group here?
Sure.
Okay. So you're going to use the same equipment you use for pruning,
Right,
right?
I'll use the same tools. The shorter shears this time probably don't have to reach up in there. These are a little shorter and a little more stout. And then I'll also still use my side cutters, my concave cutting pliers and stuff.
Justin, now that you've pruned up all the roots, are we ready to go ahead and put it back in the container?
Yep, now we're ready to go ahead and cover up these drainage holes and then put it in.
I saw these rocks come out while you were cleaning off the soil. So they're just there to keep the soil from going through the holes. I noticed in your containers you use wire, both of those
I
work.
use a lot of screen.
Do we want to put soil in first?
Sure.
Okay.
So the first step, now that we've got some of the lower roots trimmed off, we need to get some soil for them to grow into.
And then we just set this on top?
Set it in there.
Okay.
And check our height.
Okay. So we want it to be
Looks pretty good.
pretty level, the roots level with the top of the pot.
Right, and you know, personally, I like them to be a little bit under the side of the pot so that it's easier to water them. It doesn't roll off.
Yeah.
But a lot of people typically will have it up above the pot soil line. I'm sorry, the pot line.
And I noticed now we have some openings here where you cleaned out that compacted soil. Do we need to fill that back in?
Right. So next we'll start filling in all of those holes, and you can do it the slow and painful method, or you can just dump it on here and work it in.
Okay.
And I've found that shaking it works really well to get it worked down in those little holes when it's something like this also.
Okay.
So you can just jiggle it around.
Do we need any tools to compact that soil in? Or?
Yeah, we'll use one of these. We'll use a trowel and a poker to try to fill in some of the big air pockets that are in there. And sometimes after you water them really good after the first time, you'll notice some holes start to develop that you can put a little more soil in. So now I've got this little, I don't even know what it's called, but I use it. And it's a nice little tool for poking and working the soil in between the roots. And the trick a lot of times is getting the soil to go up underneath of this root ball. That's why we put some at the bottom, but a lot of times you'll still have some air pockets up under there to try to poke into.
So just like any other plant, when we repot it, we want to water it in really well, get all those air pockets out of the soil, add more if we need to. So we have that nice and settled, and you've started pruning.
Right. Generally, whenever I prune the roots, I like to also prune some off of the top of the tree also to try to keep them in balance.
Okay, so you want to do about the same proportion of roots
I
and
generally
foliage.
do. You don't have to do that, but that's the way I do it. That's always worked well for me.
Okay, well thank you so much, Justin.
Sure, thank you.
See how